Hello, everyone. My name is David Swanlund, as she said. I'm probably not going to be talking about the masks you think I'm going to talk about from what I've seen so far. I think I don't need to convince anyone in here that maps are very, very useful graphics. As researchers, we really, really love to use them because they're often very pivotal figures in our work, whether that's a paper or a presentation or a report. I can show you a map of clusters of cancer, for instance, all surrounding a factory, and you can draw your own conclusions from that, and that ends up being very powerful. But when I do that, I run the risk of exposing people's privacy because those are potentially home locations of where those people live that might have a particular disease. And this isn't just sort of a theoretical concern. In 2006, Andrew Curtis looked at Hurricane Katrina maps of mortality locations in New Orleans. And what he found is that he could digitize the map and then reverse engineer it to actually re-identify the people who had died, just from the map printed in the newspaper. So if a point was about 1.5 city blocks large, he could find the original house or at least a close neighbor. Fortunately, we have a lot of techniques that kind of help with this. And so we call them geographic masks or geomasks. Essentially, all they do is they perturb the data a little bit. They reduce the accuracy of the data in order to protect individual privacy, but without impeding our ability to sort of analyze it or learn things from it. So it's kind of a trade-off. The more accuracy we take away from the data, the better privacy we get, but then the less useful that data is. So more information loss. So it's a very delicate balance, but it's really preferable to aggregation. I know what you're probably thinking. Can't you just aggregate this to census tracts, for example? And while you can imagine a cluster of disease incidents, for example, straddling right on the border of two census tracts. And what can happen when that happens is you just lose the cluster entirely. It just disappears off the map. So these techniques allow us to keep those clusters, keep the sort of statistical significance, but without violating anyone's privacy. So this is a very simple example. It's called random perturbation. You take your sensitive points, you buffer them like 300 meters, let's say, and then you relocate the points within those buffers and then map those relocated points. Very straightforward. One issue with this is because it's random, you could move a point like 3 feet, which doesn't really give anyone any privacy. So one sort of variant on this is called donut masking. It is kind of what it sounds like. Instead of making one big buffer, you make a big buffer and a smaller inner one, and then you displace the point between the two. So you're guaranteed a certain level of displacement. And what this does is, instead of having just a little bit of privacy for a little bit of information loss, you get a little bit of information loss and a lot of privacy. So it really leverages that trade-off. Now the issue is that we don't use these. This is kind of one of my favorite papers. These authors looked at 57 journal articles that published some sort of sensitive data in maps, whether it's crime or health, et cetera. And they found that 41 of them published the actual home locations without using any geographic masking or anonymization whatsoever. And that, in total, revealed the address points of 68,000 individuals. So this is a little problematic. There are sort of small e ethical concerns here, but also big e ethics. There are a lot of policies in research surrounding protection of privacy, and this is kind of an unspoken secret that a lot of people are breaking this. I also want to stress that these are all the techniques for geographic masking are very easy to do in ArcGIS. You just throw up Model Builder. They're not too difficult, and they're usually comparatively a lot easier than the methods people might be using to analyze their data. I think the hillshade stuff that people were talking about yesterday is far harder than any of these. So I was thinking about how we could solve this, and I started to think about Color Brewer, strangely enough. When I was a wee little GIS student, Color Brewer really helped me make my maps not look like crap. It made me not only think about, or give me better palettes to use, but it made me think about color itself and sort of color theory. So as a dirty avocado-loving millennial, I decided I would make a map. So I wanted to create a web tool that would easily allow users to sort of mask their data before they map it, as well as kind of guide them along. So I armed myself with OpenLayers and turf.js. OpenLayers, I'm sure most of us are familiar. It's just a JavaScript mapping library. Turf.js is really cool. It allows you to do actually pretty powerful GIS analysis on GeoJSON data in the browser. Now, when you're making a web app, though, to anonymize inherently sensitive spatial data, there are some restrictions. It needs to be client-side. I, a random dude on the internet, cannot fairly ask you, another random person on the internet, to give me all of your sensitive data and just trust that I won't do anything nefarious with it. So I wanted it to run within the browser itself so that you don't have to install anything, you just load a web page. Ideally, my sort of mental model is as I was developing this, you should be able to load the page, go to a nuclear bunker with no internet, mask the data, and then re-emerge. Now what this means is that you can't use things like Node.js or Python or GDAL or any of the tools that would make this process easier. Also, you have to work efficiently. It turns out that tabs are quite easy to crash. Also needs to support shapefiles. I think we all know GeoJSON is kind of the standard format for web mapping, but not ArcGIS. Shapefiles really are the kind of standard of the industry, and a lot of researchers don't even know what GeoJSON is. So I was really, really fortunate to come across these 3 libraries. Shapefile.js allows you to zip a shapefile in whatever projection you want, and then import it. It'll reproject it to, I think, WebMercator, and it makes it really easy. Proj4.js, again, just simple reprojection library, and the SHP write lets you actually export a zip shapefile. And again, I think just to underscore the significance of that, shapefiles are like, they're like 5 different files. They're really not great for the web. So these make it a lot easier. I also wanted some sort of metric for privacy protection and information loss. So I don't want to just tell you, okay, mask your data, find some numbers, and just run with it. I wanted some sort of measure that people could use as just a rule of thumb for, how much privacy am I getting for this amount of information loss. So Sprills measure, it's kind of complicated, but it's essentially just the ratio of masked points that are closer to their parent location, like their original location, than to any other point. So if you had a score of 1, that would mean all the points are closer to where they started than anywhere else, which is sort of a high-risk situation. I invert this to make it sort of like a privacy score. And then mean center displacement distance. So I take all the points, I find the center, I see how far the center has moved after masking. Super crude, super rough, but very easy to do, and it gives you sort of a rough benchmark you can kind of work with. And lastly, it needs to be fast. So the standard way to do donut masking in ArcGIS, or anywhere really, is to create buffers, do symmetrical difference operations on those buffers. And when I did this in Model Builder, it took 77 minutes to do 2,000 points. That's not great. I'm sure I could optimize that, but even 10x, we're still not looking very good. Fortunately, turf.js was broken for a while. The buffer function would create buffers that were just the wrong size. So I couldn't use the standard method. So as it turns out, fortunately, generating random numbers and checking to see if they work is a lot faster than generating buffers. So as a result, instead of doing 77 minutes, we're looking at now 2,000 points in 0.9 seconds. So a lot faster. So this is what it looks like. I call it Mask My XYZ. It's got some guidance documentation and whatnot. And to use it, all you really have to do is, QGIS, you take your sensitive points, you throw them into a zip file. If we get to it, there we go. And then you just load up the site, and then you can unplug your internet at that point if you don't want to trust me, which I recommend you don't. You load it into the browser and just hit the mask or the display button. It'll show all your data on web map there. You can hit the masking button, and then boom, you've got donut mask data. You'll see the privacy score there is kind of 53. Let's say we're not happy with that. We can just on the fly adjust the distances and remask that data iteratively and sort of explore how different masking parameters affect how far the point pattern moves versus how much privacy we get in a way that before would have taken 77 minutes. So then you download, it saves it again as a zip shapefile, you extract that and throw it back into QGIS. So very easy. Yeah. So it's way, way faster than existing methods. You don't have to install anything, and I think most of all, it sort of has this educational component that just couldn't exist before because it was too difficult, where you can actually now iteratively explore the data. I do want to mention there are stronger masks that are available for sure. Typically, they require additional data like population or address data, which I don't want to burden users with trying to find. So donut masking is kind of the best method we have that doesn't require them to hunt down data. But again, more than half of sort of researchers at least aren't doing this at all. So I think donut masking, even if it's not the best method, is definitely better than absolutely nothing. So this isn't public yet, unfortunately. Peer review is slowing me down, but hopefully it'll come out soon and it'll be MIT licensed so you can hack away on it if you want, which would be appreciated. And I'd just like to end by thanking my co-authors, Supervisor Nadine Schuurman and Mariana Brussoni, and yeah, follow me on Twitter.